God kväll. Vad sker egentligen i sovjetarmen? 15 000 soldater har dött under de senaste 4 åren och det hände inte på slagfältet. Ja, varför är antalet dödsfall i sovjetarmen 5-6 gånger högre än i väst? Vi söker svaret i ett starkt reportage inifrån. Det handlar bland annat om misshandel, tortyr och våldtäkt. Men innan vi kommer så långt ska vi möta en mästerspion, en förrädare. En som vid nyligen fyllda 50 redan har gått till historien som en av de främsta i det internationella spionagets skuggvärld. Han heter Oleg Gordievsky. Sovjetspionen som blev dubbelagent, som hoppade av och som började berätta. Och nu har för första gången svensk television intervjuat honom om den sovjetiska underrättelsetjänsten KGB och Olof Palme, om KGB och Stig Bergling, om KGB och Socialistinternationalens förre generalsekreterare Bernt Karlsson. Först en bakgrund. Gordievsky hoppade av i England 1985.
25 sovjetiska diplomater stationerade i London utvisas anklagade för olovlig underrättelseverksamhet. En av de största spionaffärerna i brittisk historia var ett faktum.
The Soviet embassy most strongly protests against this provocative measure.
The British government says these men are spies. You say they're not spies.
I have no other comment but the statement I have just made.
Mannen som avslöjade de sovjetiska spionerna var dubbelagenten, den tidigare KGB-chefen i Storbritannien, Oleg Gordievsky, som hade hoppat av till väst under sommaren samma år. Gordievsky inledde sin karriär på den avdelning inom KGB som svarar för organisationens verksamhet med inriktning på Storbritannien, Sverige och de andra skandinaviska länderna. Redan när Gordievsky förflyttades till Köpenhamn i början av 70-talet var han övertygad antikommunist. Han tog kontakt med den danska underrättelsetjänsten och KGBs mödosamt uppbyggda verksamhet lämnades ut och flera danska medborgare avslöjades som spioner för Sovjets räkning.
Ordentligt vigtigt, det har været stor betydning för oss att få dessa underrättningar, dessa upplysningar av hänsyn till vår egen säkerhet.
Samtidigt fick den engelska underrättelseorganisationen MI6 ta del av Gordievskys uppgifter om svenska och norska medborgare som arbetade för Sovjetunionen. Stig Bergling och Arne Treholt var några av dem som avslöjades. Men det var efter 1982 som Gordievsky kom att bli som mest betydelsefull i sin roll som dubbelagent. Då hade han förflyttats till Storbritannien och kunde leverera ingående information om KGBs verksamhet i landet. Det var också då han kom med uppgift om den 5:e mannen. Att den ökända spionringen från Cambridge som omfattade kvartetten Philby, Burgess, McLean och Blunt hade ytterligare en medlem, John Cancross. Själv anser dubbelagenten att hans viktigaste bidrag till väst var 1983 när den tidigare KGB-chefen och dåvarande Sovjetledaren Andropov var döende. Enligt Gordievsky rådde stor osäkerhet och nervositet inom ledarskiktet i Kreml. Bland annat misstänkte Moskva att väst hade för avsikt att inleda ett kärnvapenkrig i samband med en NATO-manöver i november samma år. Gordievsky tipsade MI6 som i sin tur såg till att Warszawapakten fick övertygande information att det handlade om en manöver och ingenting annat. Och en militär konflikt kunde undvikas.
Ingen duvunge precis. Och nu ska vi höra honom själv berätta. Bland annat då om vad han visste om KGBs förhållande till ett antal namnkunniga svenskar. Det är Kanal 1:s avdelning för undersökande journalistik, den så kallade M6-gruppen, som mött honom. Oleg Gordievsky. Han möter aldrig journalister utan lösskägget och peruken.
I live in a tiny, beautiful, very lovely English town, and my neighbors don't know who I am. If I lose my privacy where I live, then the neighbors inevitably will begin to talk about me to friends. The friends will speak about it to journalists, and the journalists will start writing about me and putting traps where I live in the road, and then the KGB would know. And the KGB, they've got at least 2 departments responsible for defectors of all kinds. They have to work, and for them to have the address and the name of the defector, it is a great food for thought. They immediately will begin to make plans how to get me. And so eventually they will make a plan to assassinate me.
–1985 började KGB misstänka att Oleg Gordievsky var en förrädare. Han tvingades överge sin familj i Moskva och flydde på hemliga vägar till väst. Sen dess lever han ett anonymt liv i England. Vi träffade honom på ett hotell i London, förklädd och maskerad.
I was in the heart of the Soviet system, in the heart of the Soviet administrative system, and in the heart of the KGB. I knew the truth. I knew that the gullible and naive people of the Scandinavian countries would not understand and penetrate that life. But I knew the truth, that it was an extremely evil system. It was an expansionist and ideological system who wanted to spread the ideology to the rest of the world, slowly, not immediately, but slowly. And the first, actually, line or group of chain of countries which were under attack, it was, apart from Finland, it was Sweden, it was Denmark, it was Germany, to some extent even Great Britain.
Did you ever meet a Swedish spy or a Swedish agent?
I have never met a Swedish spy or Swedish agent, apart from one person who was as a very special KGB contact. Do you know about him? Mr. Carlson. There are in the KGB several categories of contacts. Like, for example, the most important, agent. It is a person who does for the KGB the important job. He obtaining information and doing whatever he is told by the KGB. Often he is paid money. Not always, but often. Later in the KGB they invented a second category of an agent, which they call confidential contact. Also many people who are not agents and confidential contacts, but still are very helpful for the KGB, they call them targets of cultivation. And in the late 70s, they invented a new form, a new category, and they call it unofficial special contact, which means that it's somebody who talks to the KGB, is prepared to meet, if necessary often, who is quite sincere and helpful, but he's not an agent. He's not even confidential contact. In the KGB they know that it's impossible to recruit him. He's just a person who is full of integrity and who does it probably consciously, talking to the KGB because he feels that it is important to use the KGB as a, say, channel of his information, of his messages to the Soviet leadership. And Mr. Carlson, who was secretary of the International Socialist International in London, headquarters in London, he was KGB's special unofficial contact. And I was supposed to run him as such. So I met him several times in London. He was useful because he shared the information with me or whoever from the KGB, telling about life, about intrigues, about the backstage intrigues and events there, who was important, who was less important. For example, the KGB was very keen to know what the Latin socialists are doing, how the French, Italian, and Spanish socialists were competing with the northern socialists. For the KGB and the International Department of the Central Committee, it was easier to influence North European socialist parties. but difficult to deal with those South Europeans. So they were very afraid of the Latin influence in the Socialist International. Mr. Carlson was just the person to tell everything about the balance of those two different forces there.
But what did Bernd Carlson think of you as a person? Who were you in his eyes?
It's impossible to tell. Either he thought I was KGB, but he never pronounced it, never admitted it even to himself, or he regarded me as a Soviet diplomat with a special assignment to be responsible for those unofficial contacts with the Socialist International.
In your book, you claim that the former Finnish president was a fully recruited KGB agent. What's the difference between Bernd Carlson and Urho Kekkonen?
It is actually a very good question, because in the practical, how practically the contact was run, it was often just impossible to tell. What is the difference? The difference was in the KGB's reporting. Somebody who started to work with Kekkonen early was very keen to write the reports, so that the impression in the center was that he was actually very understanding, very close, he was very helpful, obviously exaggerating his preparedness to cooperate with the KGB. That's why when they saw the file, probably quite a thick file, or maybe several files, and the KGB, they thought, so many reports, such nice reports, the relationship is developing so well. Let's declare him to a confidential contact, which is a kind of a lower level or grade of an agent. And he is declared by the KGB, being a confidential contact of the KGB. The man himself never realized he was a KGB contact or somebody who was already in the KGB's network, agent network, or in the case there was a file on him. He was just chatting, and maybe sometimes, yes, doing something what the Soviet official told him to do because he thought it was in the interest of Finland. Or he thought it was an opinion passed on to him from very senior people in Moscow.
Do you mean that Olof Palme also was chatting, or what do you mean by when you claim that KGB had great hopes in Olof Palme?
No, the hope was to make him to an agent, yes, but it remained a hope, not a reality, because he was cultivated for quite a long time and well by Mr. you know whom, Neyland. And brilliantly, he did it brilliantly. The man was intelligent, clever, sophisticated. He did it very well, writing nice reports about the whole process of cultivation. But it never came to the level when KGB could regard Mr. Palme as a confidential contact or even a special unofficial contact. It never came to it. It was interrupted by the Mr. Neyland being recalled back to Russia.
Did you ever read some of those enthusiastic reports from Mr. Neyland?
Yes, I did. I saw him quite several times. I found them even on my own desk. For them, it is an established policy toward Sweden to try to look nice, not to admit that they are spying, not to admit that they try to influence the public opinion, not to admit that there are contingency plans for the Soviet armed forces in the situation of a conflict to cross the Swedish territory and to destroy the, say, Swedish defense. They want to be nice towards Sweden. And now even more than in the past, because now there are forces not only outside the Communist Party, but even inside the Communist Party who regard Sweden as a model for the future Soviet Union. In a way, they are trying to regard Sweden as a kind of a distant relative, somebody who is can understand the Soviet Union, and they can understand Sweden, and use the experience of Sweden for their future development.
Could there be a KGB or a GRU mole within the Swedish Secret Service or military intelligence today?
Of course, I don't know. It is theoretically, it is not ruled out, but practically, I think it is unlikely. And why? Because there was burgling. It was brilliant for the KGB acquisition. For them, it was a tremendous asset to have such an agent in the Swedish intelligence community. Then he was caught, arrested, tried, imprisoned. It was already a signal to everybody in the Swedish official circles, if there was anybody else apart from him who wanted to cooperate with the Soviet intelligence. So it was a great warning. Secondly, my escape from the Soviet Union in '85, and some revelations about Sweden, which were about Sweden, which were published afterwards, and the very fact, the knowledge that there had been such an Western mole in the KGB, who was able to tell the Brits and the Scandinavian people about penetration of their society. It was another warning to anybody who wanted to cooperate with the KGB. That's why I imagine that the successes of the KGB in Sweden in the 5 years when I was away, not member of the KGB, the successes are very, very modest.
What do you know about Stig Berling?
Actually, I know quite very little. I knew that there was an agent for the KGB in the Swedish security community in the 70s. Who he was, in which department, what he was doing, I never knew exactly. The very fact that there was such a penetration reached me by chance, and in the 70s, and I informed my British friends about it. Later, again, from some internal KGB sources, I learned that that source was being run not by the KGB any longer, but the GRU. And it was a great surprise for me. I said, how has it happened? If it is somebody in the security service, in the intelligence community, it's supposed to be KGB only. No way, no point at all to run it by the army, armed forces. And they said, no, he's actually in the armed forces. And it was another detail which I think, I'm not sure, but I think I was able to tell the Brits. And it helped the KGB, it helped the Swedish security service to identify him. To have an agent who is a policeman, or in the security service, or in the military security or intelligence service. Just to have an agent, it is an incredible success, incredible success. They told me, having that agent there, we are now encouraged to penetrate other intelligence communities in other Western countries, to recruit a Swede who is a security officer. It means that we can now recruit whoever, and Frenchmen and Brits and so on. It was, for them, psychologically it was important.
Some viewers might say, well, Mr. Gordievsky is a good storyteller, but what about his credibility?
Yes, about my credibility, when people ask such questions, they forget that I'm not like other defectors who spontaneously, something is happening to them in their private life, wife, children, boss, disagreement, changing sides, running to the American embassy, please get me, take me, I'm changing sides. I had my convictions, and as a result of a very slow, gradual, ideological process, I came to the decision to cooperate with the West in '74, and cooperated for 11 years. And in those 11 years, you can easily imagine that the British intelligence community was able to ask the same questions which are now I'm being asked by you, by other media, by all the people about the Fifth Man, about Scandinavia, about the United States. All the questions have been asked and asked again, and tested and checked, and asking my next posting during my next posting in Britain again. It's one point. So it has been all checked by the specialists, experts. Second point. After the cooperation for 11 years with the West, when I was running, when there was a risk for my life practically every day, now to come out here, speaking to you, what point is for me to tell you lies? Why? This, being a disciplined and well-organized and purposeful agent for the West for many years, it is ridiculous for me to come now and to lose all my credibility telling lies to you. So it makes no sense.
So a man who for years worked as a double agent and who left his family in the way you did, he could be reliable.
Are you implying that I should? Because of being double agent, I'm not can be not believed. My point is just exactly that being an agent for the West, where I could check and in the 11 years they were able to test me so many times and recheck all those queries and doubts about my information, and all was confirmed eventually. Because of that long cooperation, there are no doubts about my credibility. As to my family, why I left the family, the people who read my stories, they know very well that it was simply the choice between staying with the family and dying afterwards in a few weeks' time, or trying to escape and to get the family back to the West somehow. I saw last time my children in June '85. My wife brought them to me. I was staying in a holiday place. KGB put me there. They wanted to keep me a place where I was under reliable observation. And she came with them, and I spent a day playing with them, and we were going for a walk with them, and it was a very happy day. I put them on the train.
How old were you?
At that time they were 4 and 5 years old. I put them on the train and jumped from the train at the last moment when the doors were closing. And it was my last time when I saw them. Then a week later, the children were absent. I came to Moscow from that holiday place. It was not outside Moscow, not too far, for a few hours to see her, and I knew that it was last time when I saw her. And I was not in the position to even to give a hint that I was leaving her for a very long time.
Why not?
How could I do it? I could not, because women are emotional. If I gave a hint that we were parting for an indefinite time, maybe forever, how she, a wife and mother of 2 young children, would react on it? And just a person who was attached to me, that emotional explosion was not ruled out. It was just impossible. It was impossible.
Did the benefits of your activities as a double agent justify leaving your family?
It is two things which are not comparable, because one is the moral question and question of family and relations, relatives, and emotional life, and the other is the business, and ideological, say, struggle and relation between the countries, intelligence, politics, and so on. There are two different things. How can we measure the two things, the value of the family or not? Probably, if it was not the family, just my life, I would have said, yes, it's justified to lose my life for what I have done, to defend the sovereignty and the security of the Scandinavian countries, of Great Britain, and generally of the West. It is worthwhile. It would have been worthwhile. But now, having been separated from the family for 5.5 years, I think no, it was not worthwhile.
så går vi vidare till Sovjetarmén. På onsdag den 7 november firas oktoberrevolutionen av år 1917 igen i Sovjetunionen och det blir som vanligt stor militärparad på Röda torget. Det finns annars de som har velat inställa den i år, men genom ett presidentdekret genomförs den som vanligt. Och om ni var med oss för 3 veckor sedan kanske ni minns reportaget då om Sovjetarmén, om ryktena om militärkupp och vad som ligger bakom dem. Det gav en bild av tillståndet i Sovjetarmén. Ikväll visar vi en annan som handlar om ond, bråd död, misshandel, tortyr och våldtäkt. Fakta är följande. Varje år inkallas 100-tusentals värnpliktiga mellan 18 och 20. Cirka 15 000 soldater har dött under de senaste 4 åren. Då är offren från Afghanistankriget inte inräknade. Det betyder 5-6 gånger fler dödsfall i Sovjetarmén än i väst. Varför är det så? Vad är det som sker i Sovjetarmén? Vi söker svar ikväll med hjälp av ett finländskt reportage. Ett reportage där delvis dramatiserade scener har spelats in på autentisk plats i Sovjetunionen och där de flesta som deltar är före detta värnpliktiga i Sovjetarmén.
I've been in Russian Army from 1983 autumn till 1985 autumn. I've been in Germany and Ukraine. Most of the time I spent in Germany, it was about 60 kilometers from Berlin.
And I was drafted in the Soviet Army and I served there from 1984 up to 1986.
1989, in the 23rd of June, they take me to the Soviet Army.
In 1987, I was taken to the Soviet Army. Before it, I had heard terrible stories about the army, and I was afraid.
There is unwritten law system which existing between soldiers, and the officers are making picture that they don't know the system at all. After 12 months, it was an unwritten tradition, this underground law that all soldiers are hitting you 12 times, and after those 12 times you are becoming an old soldier. You are becoming an old soldier. You are becoming a privileged soldier. The main thing is, in this first month, to be not afraid of them. Because if they see you are afraid of them, you will be nothing and you won't become privileged soldier after a year even. Because if anybody will see you are afraid of being fight, we will fight you as much as they can. So that's the main law of the system. If somebody was beaten when he was young, so he is going to beat anybody when he's an old soldier. How does it happen? It happens because old soldiers know each other and young soldiers does not know each other, and officers are backing this system.
Dedovshchina is really a corruption of something one finds in a lot of institutions. There's a nickname for a Soviet conscript for each of his 6 months of his 2-year service, and in his last 6 months of service he's called a ded, a granddad. The rest of the word is a Russianism to explain the period of that person's despotic rule.
Как это понимать, дедовщина? Это когда в казарме руководят не офицеры, не прапорщики и сержанты, а руководят те, кто имеет больше силы, кто отслужил, во-первых, больший срок в армии. Так называемый дед, который организовывает дедовщину в казарме, или группа их, это неофициальное. Их никто не назначал, никто не выбирал. Они существуют сами по себе. Они действуют совсем незаконными методами. Эти методы могут быть и физическое, и моральное оскорбление, может быть избиение человека, выполнение разных работ, которые человеку унизительны.
A good system, a good command and control system, a good staff in a school or in a military academy is always aware of that potential for abuse and is always prepared to stop it happening. What we've seen in the Soviet army is that abuse go unchecked for a long time and becomes so overwhelming that it's actually threatening military efficiency. In other words, the rule of the juniors by the seniors is no longer an effective element of control. It has become detrimental.
Я думаю, что дедовщина началась после того, как в армию начали призывать тех, кто отсидел в тюрьме какой-то срок. Это где-то 50-е, 60-е годы начались эти призывы. Потому что считалось, что в армии не хватает людей, и что в армию можно призывать даже тех, кто отсидел в тюрьме. А в тюрьме, конечно, законы свои, порядки тоже свои, и эти порядки в какой-то мере переносились и в армию. У разных офицеров неоднозначное отношение к дедовщине. Конечно, многие офицеры против того, чтобы существовала дедовщина, и стараются хотя бы что-то делать, что в их силах для того, чтобы дедовщину устранить.
There are very few officers who actually concern themselves with the day-to-day running of the unit. They only see soldiers to give them orders. Whereas in most modern Western armies, there's a social interchange which institutionally the Soviet army hasn't developed. Now, why this matters is because the way the Soviet armed forces are organized, you've got an almost entirely regular officer corps and an almost entirely conscript corps of soldiers, and very little in the way of a regular non-commissioned officer corps as you have in many Western armies. The way an NCO is chosen in the Soviet army, the bulk of non-commissioned officers are simply conscripts who are chosen as being above average and who spend their first 6 months or so in a sergeant training regiment and come out at the age of, say, 18 and a half and join their unit as a sergeant.
I came there as a sergeant. My first day in the small regiment, I was given a unit of 10 people who have served 1.5 years, so they have served a year more than I did that time. And my task was to take them to the shower. And that was behind the fence, some 300 meters, and there was nobody. And so we just undressed and went into the shower room. And so they started to beat me, all 10 of them. And I just thought, my only thought is, okay guys, I'm to take care just to go over this and to remain alive. And they took me under the cold shower to come to my senses again. And then some of them did it again. And then they said, that's just a lesson for you. So you are our commander, but you know we have served a year more than you. You should take it into notice and don't do stupid things, don't give stupid orders, and we'll be friends. And I thought, well, we can be friends after that, but I'll thought it over later.
There really isn't a strong NCO corps because the authority of the long-serving conscript in the barracks undermines the authority of the sergeant, because after all, he's only an 18-and-a-half-year-old guy who did his first 6 months service in sergeant training. He doesn't have the age, the authority, the experience to enforce his command. Now all that came to a head in Afghanistan, and the problems we're seeing today in the Soviet army have come to light because when that army was put to the test of war in Afghanistan, this is where it failed. Because there's no regular NCO corps, officers do the tasks which in many armed forces are done by NCOs.
Людям, непосвященным в то, что происходит в армии, очень трудно разобраться, что же происходит в армии.
The first we heard of the Dedoshchina problem, of the excessive bullying, but then the Soviet army itself issued orders to try and curb this. This was then picked up by the civilian authorities and spurred on by Gorbachev's attempts to control and to reform the army. And it was made into a really serious national issue, which the army didn't like because the army thought it was a problem belonging to the army and which the army had to solve itself.
Многие хотя бы как-то стараются вести борьбу с дедовщиной. Но дело в том, что офицер, прапорщик не может находиться в казарме 24 часа.
The modern Soviet unit is a mixture of different nationalities right down to the lowest level. And you will find 12 or 13 different nationalities in one infantry company. Now the officer corps, that's different. The officer corps is still predominantly Russian. And the Soviet general staff is 98% Slav, 85% Russian, and the rest Ukrainian and Belarusian. So the higher you get in the military system, the more Russian it gets. And in terms of command and control, it still really is the Russian army. But the difference between pre-1917 and today is that today they've got their nationalities mixed up into the unit.
Значит, в армии служат солдаты десятков национальностей. И, конечно же, они читают газеты, смотрят телевидение, слушают радио и знают, что происходит в стране. Знают, по каким причинам, например, идет борьба между азербайджанцами и армянами. И, конечно же, эти конфликты существуют. Я думаю, что много стараний прикладывают офицеры для того, чтобы как-то конфликты эти устранить. Но дело в том, что офицер, прапорщик не может постоянно находиться в казарме.
Hear reports from ex-Soviet soldiers of occurrence whereby a soldier very often Central Asian, who has been driven to desperation, perhaps by bullying, will during exercise turn his Kalashnikov onto the sergeants and Russians in his platoon and kill 10, 12, 15 at a time before he himself is stopped or shot. It's not an uncommon occurrence.
Когда существует нездоровое отношение в воинском коллективе, часто кончаются очень трагически.
For some reason or other, Soviet soldiers are being killed either by incompetence in accidents, or by faulty equipment, or by breaches of discipline, which result in their death. I think the Soviet army is still an effective functioning army. It has problems, and the problems are akin in nature to the kind of problems which afflicted the American army just after Vietnam. Problems of morale, problems of discipline, problems of drug abuse and so on. It's just that the problems in the Soviet army are much greater in extent because they're reflections of problems of society. The Soviet army has to seek new sources of inspiration. It has to re-establish a traditional military disciplinary system. It has to find something to replace the communist ideal with. And it has to find some way of dealing with its different nationalities who no longer wish to serve in what they are beginning to see as a Russian imperial army.
Det sägs att 20% av de 15 000 dödsfall man talar om under de senaste 4 åren är resultat av självmord, det vill säga 3 000. Det var ett reportage av Hakalaks produktion i Helsingfors detta, och så avslutar vi allhelgonahelgens 8 dagar. Vi är tillbaka nästa söndag igen 7:15. Nu väntar vi på Aktuellt. Tack för ikväll.